Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales and boundless imagination come to life. Enjoy the story and don't forget to subscribe. The twin sons of Karen V cast long shadows across the dusty mining colony. The air shimmered with heat waves rising from the barren ground, and the rhythmic clang of machinery echoed through the settlement. For most inhabitants, this was life, monotonous, grueling, and hopeless. But for Erin, it was only temporary. She had plans. Big ones. Erin wiped sweat from her brow as she adjusted the power couplings on an old mining rig. Her hands were calloused from years of work, but her mind was sharp, always calculating, always dreaming of escape. She glanced at her reflection in a cracked viewport nearby. Her auburn hair was tied back in a messy braid, streaked with dust and grease. Her piercing green eyes stared back at her with determination. One more job, she muttered under her breath. Just one more haul. Her father, Darius, approached from behind. His once proud stature had been diminished over the years by hardship and regret. His graying hair was unkempt, and his eyes avoided hers as he spoke. "Erin," he began hesitantly. "We need to talk." She turned to face him, wiping her hands on her worn coveralls. "What is it now? Another scheme? Another debt collector breathing down your neck?" Darius flinched at her tone but pressed on. "It's complicated. Just come home early tonight. There's something important I need to discuss." Erin narrowed her eyes suspiciously but nodded. "Fine. But this better not be another one of your get-rich-quick ideas." As Darius walked away, guilt weighed heavily on him. He knew what he was about to do would shatter whatever trust remained between them, but he had no choice. That evening, Erin returned home to their modest dwelling on the outskirts of the colony. The air inside was stifling, filled with tension she couldn't quite place. Darius sat at their small dining table, his hands clasped tightly together. "What's going on?" she asked warily. Before he could answer, there was a knock at the door, a sharp, deliberate sound that sent chills down her spine. Darius stood abruptly and opened it to reveal two men dressed in sleek black uniforms adorned with crimson insignias, the mark of the Valen Syndicate. Behind them loomed a towering enforcer droid with glowing red optics. Erin's heart sank as realization dawned on her. "No. You didn't." "I'm sorry," Darius whispered, unable to meet her gaze. One of the men stepped forward with a predatory smile. "Erin Starling. By order of Contract Agreement Number VX 2037-B, you are hereby remanded into our custody." She backed away instinctively but found herself cornered by the enforcer droid. "What contract? What are you talking about?" Darius finally looked at her, tears streaming down his face. "I had no choice. They were going to kill me if I didn't pay my debts. So you sold me?" Her voice cracked with disbelief and fury. "It's not like that," he protested weakly. "They promised you'd be safe, just working for them." Erin's mind raced as she tried to process his betrayal. She had always known Darius was flawed, weak even, but this was unforgivable. The enforcer droid grabbed her arm with cold precision. She struggled against its grip but knew it was futile. "You won't get away with this," she spat at Darius as she was dragged toward the waiting transport outside. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, his voice barely audible over her shouts. The transport ship lifted off moments later, leaving Karen V behind in a cloud of dust. Inside its dimly lit hold, Erin sat shackled to a metal bench surrounded by other captives, all silent and defeated. But not Erin. Her green eyes burned with determination as she studied every detail of her surroundings, the guards' movements, the layout of the ship's interior, and began formulating a plan. She wasn't going down without a fight. The drunken Phoenix's engines hummed softly as it drifted through the vast emptiness of space. Inside the cramped cockpit, Travis reclined in the pilot's seat, his feet propped up on the console as he absently flipped his lucky coin across his knuckles. Beside him, Princess Talia sat rigidly, her golden eyes fixed on the starfield beyond the viewport. "So," Travis drawled, breaking the tense silence. "What's the plan, Your Highness? We can't exactly waltz back into your father's kingdom." Talia's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "We need allies. Powerful ones who can stand against both my father and the Rear Empire." Travis snorted. "Good luck with that. Most folks with that kind of juice aren't exactly the charitable type." "Then we'll have to be persuasive," Talia replied, her voice steely with determination. Before Travis could respond, Zadie's metallic voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "Hate to interrupt your scintillating conversation, but we've got company." "Big company." Travis's feet hit the floor as he leaned forward, fingers flying over the controls. "Talk to me, Zadie. What are we dealing with?" "Syndicate cruiser," the AI reported. "Valen class. They're hailing us." Travis cursed under his breath. "The Valen Syndicate? How did they find us so quickly?" "Your father's work, no doubt," Talia said grimly. "Probably," Travis agreed. "But we can't outrun a Valen cruiser in this rust bucket. Looks like we're about to make some new friends." He flashed Talia a roguish grin. "Try to look less royal." The comm channel crackled to life, and a smooth, cultured voice filled the cockpit. "Unidentified vessel, this is the Valen cruiser Nightshade. You are carrying cargo of significant interest to the Syndicate. Prepare to be boarded." Travis keyed the mic. "Nightshade, this is the, Drunken Phoenix. There must be some mistake. We're just a couple of down-on-our-luck traders trying to make an honest living." A dry chuckle came over the comm. "A noble effort, Mr. Black, but let's dispense with the charade. We know exactly who you are and what, or should I say who, you're carrying. Now, you have two choices. You can cooperate and dock with us peacefully, or we can disable your ship and drag you in. The outcome will be the same either way, but one option is considerably less painful for you." Travis muted the comm and turned to Talia. "Any bright ideas, Princess?" Talia's eyes narrowed. "We can't outrun them, and we can't outfight them. Our only option is to go along with it and look for an opportunity to escape once we're aboard." "Great," Travis muttered. "Out of the frying pan and into the plasma furnace." He unmuted the comm. "All right, Nightshade. We'll play nice. Sending docking coordinates now." As the Drunken Phoenix was drawn into the massive hangar of the Nightshade, Travis and Talia stood side by side in the airlock. Travis continued to flip his coin nervously. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "just follow my lead. I've dealt with the Syndicate before." Talia arched an eyebrow. "Why am I not surprised?" The airlock hissed open, revealing a squad of heavily armed Syndicate enforcers led by a tall, imposing figure. The man's face was hidden behind an ornate mask, but his voice was unmistakable as he spoke. "Travis Black. It's been far too long." The masked man's gaze shifted to Talia. "And the esteemed Princess Talia Starfire. What an unexpected pleasure." Travis stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Talia. "Kale. Still hiding that pretty face of yours, I see." The masked man, Kale, chuckled. "Some of us prefer to maintain an air of mystery, Travis. Now, shall we dispense with the pleasantries? You have something, or rather, someone, that doesn't belong to you." "Funny," Travis retorted. "I was about to say the same thing to you." Kale's posture stiffened. "Choose your next words carefully, Black. The Syndicate's patience has limits." Talia stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "I belong to no one. Not my father, not the Rear Empire, and certainly not your Syndicate." "Bold words, Princess," Kale said, a note of admiration creeping into his voice. but ultimately irrelevant. You are now in the custody of the Valen Syndicate. Mr. Black, you are free to go, assuming you wish to leave the princess in our care. Travis's hand tightened around his coin. Now, Kale, you know me better than that. Where the lady goes, I go. How chivalrous, Kale drawled. Very well. Escort our guests to the detention level. And relieve Mr. Black of any, shall we say, unconventional items he may be carrying. As the enforcers moved to search them, Travis locked eyes with Talia. A silent understanding passed between them. Whatever came next, they were in this together. The detention level of the Nightshade was a maze of sterile corridors and energy-shielded cells. Travis and Talia were unceremoniously shoved into one such cell, the crackling barrier springing to life behind them. Well, Travis said, settling onto the hard bunk. This is cozy. Talia paced the small space, her mind racing. We need to find a way out of here. Fast. Travis leaned back, his expression unreadable. Relax, princess. Sometimes the best move is to sit tight and wait for an opportunity to present itself. And how often has that strategy worked for you? Talia asked skeptically. Travis grinned. More often than you'd think. Besides, I have a feeling our masked friend Kale might be more of an ally than an enemy. Talia's golden eyes narrowed. What makes you say that? Let's just say Kale and I have history. Complicated history. Before Talia could press for more details, the energy barrier flickered and died. Kale stepped into the cell, his mask betraying no emotion. It seems, he said quietly, that we have much to discuss. The Nightshade's detention level was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of energy barriers lining the cells. Erin sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor, her green eyes scanning every corner of their confinement. Kale stood just outside the now deactivated energy shield, his imposing figure silhouetted by the dim corridor lights. His mask betrayed no emotion, but his voice carried a weight that hinted at inner conflict. You have questions, Kale said, his tone even. Erin rose to her feet, her defiance undimmed despite the circumstances. Questions? Oh, I have plenty. Like why a so-called bounty hunter with a conscience is working for a syndicate that traffics people. Kale tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. It's not as simple as you think. It never is, Erin shot back. But let me guess, you tell yourself you're just doing a job, right? That you're not responsible for what happens after. Kale didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped into the cell, his boots clicking softly against the floor. You're not like the others, he said finally. Most people in your position would be begging for mercy or resigned to their fate. But you're already planning your next move. Erin crossed her arms. Observant. Now tell me why you're really here. Kale hesitated before speaking. The syndicate isn't as united as it seems. There are factions within it, some more ruthless than others. I've been reconsidering my loyalties. How convenient, Erin said dryly. And what does that have to do with me? You're valuable, Kale replied bluntly. Not just to the syndicate but to anyone who opposes them. If I help you escape, it could be my way out too. Erin narrowed her eyes, studying him carefully. She didn't trust him, not yet, but she saw no other immediate options. Fine, she said after a long pause. But if you double-cross me, I'll make sure it's the last thing you ever do. Kale inclined his head slightly, almost in acknowledgement of her threat. Fair enough. The plan was risky, bordering on suicidal, but it was all they had. Kale led Erin through the labyrinthine corridors of the Nightshade, his knowledge of the ship's layout proving invaluable. They moved quickly but cautiously, avoiding patrols and security cameras with practiced ease. Where are we going? Erin whispered as they ducked into a maintenance alcove to avoid a passing guard. The ship's AI core, Kale replied quietly. If we can disable or reprogram it, we'll have control over most of the ship's systems, including the docking bay doors. And how do you plan to do that? Aaron asked skeptically. Cale reached into his coat and produced a small device resembling a data spike. This should do the trick. Aaron raised an eyebrow but said nothing as they continued toward their destination. The AI core was housed in a heavily secured chamber near the center of the ship. The room was bathed in a cold blue light emanating from the central console, a sleek column of glowing panels and holographic displays. Cale approached the console and began working quickly, inserting the data spike into a port and typing commands into the interface. How long will this take? Aaron asked, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. Not long, Cale replied without looking up. Just keep an eye out. Aaron positioned herself near the entrance, her heart pounding as she listened for any sign of approaching guards. Minutes felt like hours as Cale worked in silence. Finally, he straightened and removed the data spike from the console. It's done, he said. I've rerouted control of the docking bay doors to my personal terminal. We need to move, now. Their escape route took them through one of the ship's cargo holds, a cavernous space filled with crates and containers bearing the Syndicate's insignia. As they navigated through the maze of storage units, Aaron couldn't help but notice several other captives being held in makeshift cells along one wall. We can't just leave them here, she said, stopping abruptly. Cale hesitated. We don't have time. I'm not leaving without them, Aaron interrupted firmly. Cale sighed but relented, using his access codes to unlock the cells. The captives, mostly miners and laborers from various colonies, stared at their rescuers with a mix of confusion and hope. Follow us, Aaron instructed them. We're getting out of here. The group reached the docking bay without incident, but their luck ran out as soon as they entered. A squad of Syndicate enforcers awaited them, weapons drawn and ready. You didn't think it would be that easy, did you? A woman stepped forward from among the enforcers, a tall figure with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow unnaturally under the harsh lights. Vera, Cale muttered under his breath. You disappoint me, Cale, Vera said coldly. I thought you were smarter than this. Cale stepped protectively in front of Aaron and the others. Let them go, Vera. They're not worth this fight. Vera smirked. Oh, but they are, especially her. She gestured toward Aaron with a gloved hand. Do you even know who she is? What she's capable of? Aaron felt a chill run down her spine but refused to show fear. Why don't you enlighten me? Vera's smirk widened into a predatory grin. You'll find out soon enough, assuming you survive. Without warning, chaos erupted in the docking bay as Vera signaled her enforcers to attack. Aaron ducked behind a stack of crates as blaster fire filled the air around her. She grabbed a discarded weapon from one of the fallen guards and returned fire with surprising accuracy for someone who had never been formally trained. Cale fought with ruthless efficiency, taking down enforcers with precision shots and hand-to-hand combat when necessary. The captives scattered in all directions, some trying to find cover while others made desperate dashes toward waiting ships. Amidst the chaos, Leora, the rogue AI embedded in one of the docked ships, activated its systems and began firing on Syndicate forces using automated turrets mounted on its hull. This way. Leora's voice echoed through an external speaker as she opened her ship's ramp for boarding. Aaron and Cale led the remaining captives toward Leora's ship under heavy fire from Vera's forces. As they reached safety aboard Leora's vessel, Cale turned back toward Vera one last time before sealing the ramp behind him. This isn't over. Vera shouted after them as Leora's ship lifted off and sped away from the nightshade. In hyperspace aboard Leora's vessel, Aaron finally allowed herself to breathe again as she collapsed into one of the seats in the common area. Cale sat across from her, removing his mask for the first time to reveal a face marked by scars and weariness, but also resolve. You did good back there, he said quietly. Aaron met his gaze evenly. So did you. For now, they were free, but both knew that their fight against the syndicate was far from over. The drunken phoenix touched down on the arid surface of Zar 5 with a wheeze of overworked landing gear. Dust billowed around the battered hull as the engines powered down, leaving only the sound of cooling metal in the desert heat. Kale stared out the viewport at the barren landscape. Twin red suns hung low on the horizon, transforming the endless sand dunes into a sea of fire. Perfect, he muttered, a grim satisfaction in his voice. Cover. A wasteland so desolate even syndicate patrols couldn't be bothered to check it. Aaron, standing beside him, peered out at the desolate vista. Welcome to paradise, she said drily, a hint of skepticism in her tone. She folded her arms across her chest, assessing their surroundings with a critical eye. The heat was already intense, even in the relative cool of the ship's interior. The landscape stretched endlessly, a monotonous expanse of sand and rock broken only by the occasional jagged outcrop. Not exactly what I pictured when I thought of freedom, she admitted, but there was a glint of determination in her eyes. They had escaped the nightshade, but their journey was far from over. It's not about the scenery, Aaron, Kale replied, turning away from the viewport. It's about staying alive. And here, we have a chance. He gestured toward the ship's rear. Leora has identified a settlement a few kilometers to the west. It's a haven for outlaws and scavengers, not exactly the friendliest place, but they won't ask too many questions. Outlaws and scavengers, Aaron echoed, raising an eyebrow. Sounds charming. Kale shrugged. Charm is a luxury we can't afford. We need information, supplies, and a way to disappear. This is the best we've got. He turned to address the motley group of freed captives gathered in the drunken phoenix's main hold. They were a mixed bunch, miners, laborers, and even a few merchants, all bearing the scars of their time under syndicate control. All right, listen up, Kale said, his voice clear and authoritative. We're going to a settlement called Dust Ridge. It's not safe, but it's our best chance. Stick together, do what I say, and we might just make it through this. He paused, his gaze sweeping over their faces. Any questions? A grizzled old miner stepped forward, his eyes filled with suspicion. Why should we trust you? You're syndicate, or were. Kale met his gaze unflinchingly. I made a choice on that ship. I chose to help you escape. That's all you need to know. He looked at Aaron. Let's go. The trek to Dust Ridge was brutal. The twin suns beat down mercilessly, turning the sand into a shimmering inferno. Water was scarce, and the air crackled with heat. The former captives, weakened by their ordeal, struggled to keep up. Aaron, despite her own weariness, helped to support those who faltered, offering words of encouragement and sharing her meager water rations. Kale, ever vigilant, scanned the horizon for threats, his hand never far from the blaster at his hip. As they neared the settlement, they began to see signs of civilization, discarded machinery, wrecked vehicles, and makeshift shelters cobbled together from scrap metal and salvaged materials. Dust Ridge was a squalid collection of shacks and tents clustered around a dried-up oasis, a testament to the harsh realities of life on Zar 5. The settlement was teeming with a ragtag assortment of characters, scavengers in tattered clothing, grizzled mercenaries, and shady merchants hawking their wares. All eyes turned to the newcomers as they approached, sizing them up with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Stay close, Kale warned, his voice low. And keep your hands visible. They made their way through the crowded streets, the air thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and desperation. Aaron felt a knot of unease in her stomach. This was a far cry from the freedom she had dreamed of. Kale led them to a dimly lit cantina at the heart of the settlement, a grimy establishment called the Rusty Spanner. The air inside was thick with smoke and the sounds of drunken laughter and raucous gambling. This is where we'll find information, Kale said, gesturing to the crowded bar. And hopefully, some allies. He approached the barkeep, a burly man with a scarred face and a cybernetic eye that glowed with an eerie green light. "Torvin," Kale said, his voice low and respectful. "It's been a while." Torvin squinted at him through his good eye, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Kale. What brings you to this forsaken rock? And who are your friends?" "We need a place to lay low," Kale replied. "And some information. I'm looking for a way off-world, and anyone who knows about the Syndicate's operations in this sector." Torvin's smile faded. "The Syndicate? You're playing with fire, Kale. They have eyes and ears everywhere." "I know," Kale said. "But I have something they want." He gestured toward Aaron. Torvin's gaze turned to Aaron, and his cybernetic eye widened slightly. "Her? What's so special about her?" "That's not for you to know," Kale replied. "Just tell me what I need to know." Torvin hesitated, then sighed. "All right, Kale. I owe you one. There's a pilot named Joran who frequents this place. He's got a ship, and he's not afraid of a little trouble. He might be able to help you. But be warned, he's not the easiest person to deal with." "Where can I find him?" Kale asked. "He's usually here in the evenings," Torvin replied. "Just look for the man with the cybernetic arm and the haunted eyes." Kale nodded. "Thanks, Torvin. I appreciate it." He turned to Aaron and the others. "We wait." The hours passed slowly. The cantina filled with more patrons, the noise and tension growing with each passing moment. Aaron sat at a table with Kale and a few of the other escapees, trying to remain inconspicuous while keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. As darkness fell, a figure entered the cantina that fit Torvin's description perfectly. He was a tall, lean man with a cybernetic arm that gleamed in the dim light. His face was etched with deep lines, and his eyes held a haunted look that spoke of a troubled past. "That's him," Kale said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Joran." He stood up and approached the man, Aaron close behind. "Joran," Kale said, his voice respectful. "Can we talk?" Joran turned to face him, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who are you? And what do you want?" "My name is Kale," Kale replied. "And we need your help." He paused, then added, "We're running from the Syndicate." Joran's eyes widened slightly, and a flicker of interest appeared in his gaze. "The Syndicate, huh? Now this is getting interesting." He gestured toward a secluded corner of the cantina. "Let's talk." Joran eyed Kale and Aaron with suspicion, his one good eye gleaming in the dim light of the rusty spanner. "The Syndicate, huh? That's a heavy burden to carry in this neck of the woods." He took a long drag from his scent cigar, the tip glowing a sickly green. "What makes you think I'd risk my neck for a couple of Syndicate runaways?" Kale leaned forward, his voice low and persuasive. "Because I know you, Joran. You used to fight against them. You lost everything to them. You haven't forgotten that, have you?" Joran's expression darkened. "That was a long time ago. I'm just trying to survive now." But Aaron saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, a spark of the old fire. "Surviving isn't living," Aaron said, stepping forward. "The Syndicate thrives on fear. They crush anyone who stands in their way. If we don't fight back, they'll keep taking everything." Joran studied her, his gaze intense. "And what makes you think you can fight them? You're just one person." "I'm not alone," Aaron replied, gesturing to the freed captives huddled in the cantina. "And we're not afraid anymore." Joran was silent for a long moment, considering their words. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right. I'll help you. But don't think this is charity. I have my own reasons." "What are they?" Kale asked cautiously. Joran smirked, a hint of his former self returning. "Let's just say I have a score to settle with someone high up in the Syndicate." Someone who cost me more than just my arm. He stubbed out his synth cigar. I have a ship, the Stardust Drifter. It's not much, but it'll get you off-world. I'll need a favor in return. Name it, Kale said, relieved. I need you to help me get to Vera's flagship, Joran said, his voice hard. She's planning something big, something that could destabilize the entire sector. I need to know what it is, and I need to stop her. Aaron and Kale exchanged a look. Vera was the same syndicate enforcer who had overseen Aaron's capture and nearly stopped their escape. She was ruthless, ambitious, and incredibly dangerous. We're in, Aaron said, her voice resolute. But we'll do it our way. Joran led them out of the cantina and toward the outskirts of Dust Ridge, where his ship was docked. The Stardust Drifter was a battered freighter, its hull scarred and patched, but it looked surprisingly well maintained. She's an old girl, Joran said, patting the hull affectionately. But she's got a few tricks up her sleeve. As they boarded the ship, Aaron noticed a lone figure standing in the shadows, watching them. It was Darius, her father. She stopped, her heart pounding. What are you doing here? Darius stepped forward, his expression a mixture of guilt and desperation. I had to see you. To apologize. Aaron glared at him, her anger still burning. Apologize? You sold me to the syndicate. You condemned me to a life of servitude. I know, Darius said, his voice choked with emotion. I made a terrible mistake. I was desperate. They threatened to kill me. So you sacrificed me instead? Aaron shot back. That makes it okay. No, Darius admitted. It doesn't. I'll never forgive myself. But I want to help you. I have information about the syndicate. Information that could save your life. Aaron hesitated. She didn't trust her father, but she couldn't deny that his information might be valuable. What kind of information? Kale asked, his hand resting on his blaster. I know about Vera's plan, Darius said, his voice low. She's been smuggling weapons and supplies to a hidden base on the other side of the sector. A base that could threaten the entire region. Joran's eyes narrowed. What's the location? Darius hesitated, then recited a set of coordinates. It's heavily guarded, but if you can get past the defenses, you might be able to stop her. Aaron studied her father, trying to gauge his sincerity. She still felt betrayed and hurt, but she also saw a glimmer of regret in his eyes. I don't forgive you, she said finally. But I'll use your information. If it saves lives, maybe it'll be worth something. Darius nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you. Please, be careful. He turned and disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Aaron and Kale to board the Stardust Drifter, uncertain of what the future held. Aboard the Stardust Drifter, Joran prepped the ship for launch. Leora integrated its systems into the ship's network, granting them a valuable ally. Setting course for the coordinates Darius provided, Joran announced, his hands flying across the controls. It's a long shot, but it's our best chance. As the ship lifted off from Zark 5, Aaron looked back at the desolate planet, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She had escaped the syndicate, found new allies, and confronted her past. But the fight was far from over. The Stardust Drifter jumped into hyperspace, carrying them toward an unknown future, filled with danger and uncertainty. But Aaron was ready. She had found her purpose. And she wouldn't back down.